Hey ISG and welcome back. Today we're going to do something on the 1911, the whipping post of the modern gun world with its legacy of 2 world wars. So what is it about this pistol that locked it into legend and lore, and what is it that's making it fall from grace? So we have some thoughts on that, but first we want to say that typically the 1911 is one of those guns that people generally categorize as a 1911. That's like saying pickup truck. There's tons of them by different makers and different manufacturers for different purposes. If you get a 1911 and you just grab whatever's out there because you want a 1911, don't be surprised if the results you get kind of suck. You're getting what you paid for. However, there are some really well-made 1911s out there. Specifically, this is a Springfield operator. Springfield Armory does pretty good, consistent 1911s. We've had good luck with them over the years. Found them to be decently reliable and pretty tough. Now, the same cannot be said for some other higher-end manufacturers like Kimber and even Colt. We've got an example of a Colt Commander here, and this one is nothing but problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss why that is. The first thing about it is the 1911 was chambered for .45. Everything about its design was revolving around it being a .45 caliber pistol because the U.S. Army wanted something that had a little bit more stopping power after the Moro insurrection in the Philippines. Now, the .45's stopping power was the stuff of legend. Of course, it was contracted to be the pistol with stopping power, so for the most people, it was the pistol with stopping power. Now, we know that's kind of silly nowadays because the FBI has done exhaustive studies on the matter, and they found that really all handguns are pretty dismal in terms of their performance. The one exception being the 10mm, which most people can't shoot quickly or accurately under pressure. So when we discuss 1911s, we're going to assume you have a full frame government model in .45. If you don't, be ready for problems. That's just the way it is. The 9mm don't function well. The 38 Supers don't function all that well. Now, some of those can be made to do that, but they're typically race guns. They're not carry guns. And what we're going to talk about is something that you would find. So first of all, why would you want to devote any time to a 1911? After all, it's heavy. This thing is several pounds. It holds 8 rounds, which is not very much. And for what you get, it's pretty bulky. This isn't a great carry gun. It's going to print if you carry it strong side because the grip is fairly long. That's about 5 inches. So what is it that makes this thing still a contender? Well, first and foremost, they're everywhere. Now, as we often talk about, depending on what you're into and what your job is, you may have to source things in situ when you get to a scenario. Now, if that's a disaster situation, you're away from home, or you're responding to it, you may not have a choice. You may have to pick up what's there. Now, we don't want to trend too close towards edgy, but 1911s have been around for a long time, and they're very, very often in the custody of people who do not take a lot of caution with their stuff. The black market, my friends, is packed with 1911s, and that's both domestically and abroad. They've been copied by everybody, so you find a lot of them around. It's a good weapon to know because there's a good chance that they are around. So with that in mind, it doesn't do anything better than a modern double-stack 9mm strike-fired pistol. That's just the truth of the matter. It's less comfortable, it's larger, carries less rounds, it's not as good by any objective measure. If you stop and look at them, the 1911 is slightly inferior. But it does have some upsides. So first and foremost, the triggers on the 1911 are just sublime. They truly are a work of art. The single action trigger is probably the single biggest selling point that most people get when they pick up a 1911 and fall in love with them. There's some benefit to that. It doesn't matter if you have 12 or 15 rounds of 9mm on board if you've got a mushy trigger that you can't work. If you do have something decent that you're familiar with and you're comfortable with, a solid hit from a .45 is better than a couple misses from a 9mm. But if we're talking about controllability, the 9mm usually win. So again, take this all with a grain of salt, make up your own mind. When talking about the 1911s, the conversation has to return to what are its fundamental flaws, what makes it worse than the double stack Wonder 9s of now. And the answer is that there are some design flaws. I'm going to use the Colt for the example. So the original 1911s, and this is not a government model, this is a Commander, and it's lightened, which is a big no-no. Don't change anything about the frame, weight, or spring ratios with 1911s, because all those things factor directly into their functionability and their reliability. But originally they didn't have these beaver tail grips. They would pinch your fingers. That having a grip safety means that you absolutely have to, every time, 100% of the time, have a perfect grip when this pistol comes up out of the holster. Now the other thing is these pistols are made to be carried cocked and locked. So you have to hardwire removing that safety as you come out of the holster. It has to happen every single time without fail. So if you're going to use a 1911, you have to ensure every single time you get a perfect grip, and as you're presenting the weapon, that safety comes off as a part of that presentation. Failing that, you're in for trouble. It's a very big problem. And these are actually very well known for limp wristing and malfunctions as well. So you have to have that grip for more than just one reason. Some of the other things that the 1911 suffers from is the lack of an ambidextrous safety. Now that's important to me. Everybody has slightly different priorities. I like to be able to switch hands and still activate or deactivate a safety. And perhaps the biggest one is the magazine well. Now you can see there is no taper on this magazine well. It's straight or flush. Now why is it a big deal? Well, 1911 holds 8 rounds. When you have a straight magazine, it looks like a stick, and a straight magazine well, that means there is literally 0 room for error when you go to reload, okay? And when you only have 7 or 8 rounds, you're going to have to reload. I mean, it may statistically not be the case for civilian defensive encounters, but having only that few rounds on board is a legitimate handicap. More is always better. It's better to be having them and looking at them than looking for them. So one of the limits of the 1911 is that magazine well. So you're going to have to practice 10 times for every one that your buddies running double stack 9s are. Okay. So one of the things that we want to discuss is if you're going to make modifications to these pistols, there are a few that make good sense. A beveled magazine well is one of them, because again, when you're looking at the tolerances here, there's just not much, right? You have to practice with these things over and over again. Otherwise, you're going to start getting this number where you're trying to find the magazine well. You want that to be as smooth as you can possibly get it to be. Now, with a beveled magazine well, like this one here is a Wilson Combat. This was an aftermarket add-on. This pistol was a prototype that Springfield did up. It eventually split the 2 lines and became the Marine Corps operator and the TRP. This is a loaded operator. But in any case, that beveled magazine well makes inserting magazines much, much easier. So you just index like we do with any reload and insert the magazine. So it's far cleaner to work with a beveled magazine well. Avoiding the bite from the beaver tail is another one. Now, other features like the skeletonized trigger and hammer have become ubiquitous. They're on almost every 1911 now, and they're mostly cosmetic, if we're being honest. If you want to get into race gun and IPSC and stuff like that, having an adjustable trigger might be good, but most stock 1911 triggers are fine. One of the things that I do like about the loaded series is that they do come with the Novak sights. I would prefer something with a ledge, so it can be racked off the belt. This one can't. You have to work around that. But having something other than the standard GI sights is definitely a benefit. The GI model or mil-spec model in 1911s, they may have some nostalgia, but functionally they're inferior. It just is what it is. Apart from that, one of the things we always say is that when you run a 1911, you're working twice as hard to do half as much, and that's the truth of it. Every time you reload, your buddy is probably still going to be shooting his Glock 17. Right? You're going to have to do 3 reloads for every one that he does. That's a limitation. So what we try to tell everybody is if you show up with a 1911, you better be able to run that thing. The good news is if you can run a 1911, pretty much anything else is going to be a piece of cake. All you're going to have to do is kind of adjust to the trigger, and you should be able to run it like crazy, because these are tough guns to work with, or you fight them a little bit in every way except for your trigger pull. So in any case, the 1911 still has a place. It's still a viable option for some people, and if you live in a banned state where there's magazine capacity restrictions, you might choose a 1911. Now, there are other sensible choices, single stack, subcompacts, and things like that, which we think make more sense. But we're not in the crowd that thinks if you have a 1911, you're a dinosaur rider and you're outdated and you're an idiot or this or that. Just don't fall back on the it won 2 world wars or it's a man-killing death ray stuff, because that's just not true. Go into it with sobriety, know what you're getting, know its limitations, and get damn good with it. If you can run a 1911 very well, you'll impress people and it'll be a solid, serviceable sidearm. If you can't, you're going to look like a dunce. Don't make that mistake. Anyway, this is Aaron from ISG. Thank you for watching, and we hope you've enjoyed this presentation on running the 1911.